So what we're going to look at here is solving quadratic equations using factors. So when we say solve in a quadratic, what we're trying to do is we're trying to find this thing called the root. So what is the root? So the root of an equation, or the roots of an equation, are the values of x which satisfy the equation. So for example, the value of x that I can substitute into this quadratic equation here, that when I calculate it or when I multiply it out, okay, so I put in x in here, it will be equal to 0. So when it's substituted into the equation and you work it out, then you'll get the value of 0. So essentially what you're trying to do is you're trying to solve for x. And we're looking at quadratic equations. So this here is a quadratic equation. How do I know it's a quadratic equation? So I have this x to the power of 2 in the equation. So again, the first thing that you want to do is you want to, if you're given a quadratic like this, you want to be able to factorize it. Okay, so you want to end up with the factors for this quadratic. So how do we go about factorizing the quadratic? So the first thing we have to do is, so we can do what's known as the trial and error method. So you could draw a little table like this. And you want to focus on the first term and the last term. So for example, x squared. And then we have, and we want to get the factors for x squared. And then we want to get the factors for this last term here, which is minus 14. And you want to get the factors for that as well. So if we think about the factors, so the factors are terms or values that will divide in evenly into this term, and then when they're multiplied by each other will give you the term. So what do we mean by that? So if we take this factor pair, so x multiplied by x, so x by x gives me x squared, and then also as well you have minus x multiplied by minus x. Okay, so you have something like that. And then you want to get the factors of minus 14. So the numbers that will, the pair of numbers that will divide in evenly into 14, and when you multiply them by each other, it gives you 14. So if we think about, for example, we might have minus 7 and 2. Okay, so minus 7 multiplied by 2 gives me minus 14. You might have 7 and 2. Then you might have, for example, minus 7 and minus 2. And then you might have 14 and minus 1. And then you could have minus 14 and 1. So these are what are known as the factor pairs for this particular term here. And then what we want to do is we do what's known as the trial and error method. So we try factor pairs until we get a pair that works, that when you multiply them by each other will give you this equation here. So on the left hand side you put the factors that relate to x squared. Okay, so you have the left hand side here. And then on the right hand side you put the factors that relate to minus 14. Okay, so what we can do is we can try the factor pairs. So if I try this, so remember the factors that make up this term here, they go on the left hand side in the bracket. So what do we mean by that? So we put this here like this, x and x. So you have the left hand side in both of the brackets, and then you have the right hand side in both of the brackets. The right hand side, and maybe if I do a little, so I'll just make an OR over here. Okay, so let's say, so the terms that relate to this go on the right, on the left hand side, should I say, left hand side, and then the terms that relate to this go on the right hand side. Okay, so it's kind of the way that the expression is when it's laid out like this. So then we want to put in here, we want to try this factor pair here, see if it works. So we put in minus 7 here, and then we put in plus 2 here. So that's from this factor pairs here. So we want to try these out and see if they work. Okay, so we're trying out these guys here and these guys here. So how do we know if it works? Well, we have to multiply it out. So what do we have to multiply? So we multiply, let's see now where we could do this. So we're going to be multiplying this by this by this, and then we're also going to multiply this by this and this by this. Okay, so this is the way we multiply it out. And what will that look like? So let's do it now. So x multiplied by x gives me x squared. X multiplied by plus 2 gives me plus 2x. Okay, so that's the first one. Then minus 7 by x gives me minus 7x. And minus 7 by plus 2 gives me plus 14. Okay, so it looks something like that. And then we can simplify this by adding up the like terms. So for example, we have this would be equal to x squared plus 2x minus 7x gives me minus 5x. So if I'm on minus 7x and then I plus 2x, it brings me to minus 5x and then plus 14. So we can see now that these factor pairs here, so these are the factors of this expression here. So what does that mean? It means that, so if I take these and divide them into this expression, they will divide in evenly. And then when I multiply them by each other, it gives me the expression. So now we know we have identified the factor pairs. Now what we want to do is we want to take these factor pairs and we want to use the factor pairs to find out what the x values are. So what does x actually equal to? And what we're doing is we're using these factors to find out the roots. Okay, and the roots just means the values that of x that will satisfy this expression here. Now what we can say then is that, so we bring these over here, so x minus 7 by x plus 2, they are the factor pairs. So if I multiply these by each other, as we've done already, it gives us this expression here. And we can see that this expression is equal to 0, so therefore these factors, when they're multiplied by each other, will also be equal to 0. And if the both of these multiplied by each other are equal to 0, then each of these in turn are also equal to 0. And this is how we find the roots. So let's say if I want to find the first root using this first factor, okay, so let's say we call it root 1. We take this factor, so x minus 7, and we make it equal to 0. Okay, so make it equal to 0 like that. Now what we can see here is that we've got a linear equation, and what we can do is we can solve this and find out what x is. So x minus 7 is equal to 0. So if I want to just find out what x is on its own, I have to get rid of this minus 7. So I have to plus 7. And if I add 7 here, I have to add 7 here as well. And what will happen is this minus 7 and plus 7 will cancel out, and I'll be left with x is equal to 7. So 7 here is the first root, okay? And if I want to find out then the second root, so let's say we want to work out what the second root is, we'll just change the color here a bit. So root 2, so I just take this guy and I do exactly the same thing. So I make it equal to 0. So x plus 2 is equal to 0. And again, now what I can do is I can just solve this. So if x plus 2 is equal to 0, I want to get rid of this 2, so I have to minus 2 from here. If I minus 2 on this side, I have to minus 2 on this side. Whatever I do on one side of the equal sign, I have to do on the other. These will cancel out, and I'll be left with x is equal to minus 2. So now what we've done is we have identified what the roots are. So essentially, x is equal to 7. Okay, so it's sorry, x, we do it down here. So x is equal to 7 and x is equal to minus 2. So what does that mean? It means that if I take this original expression that I started with, and let's just bring this down here. So we'll call it, so x squared minus 5x minus 14 is equal to 0. Okay, so that's the expression that we started off with. And what these roots are is that if I take this value, so let's say x is equal to 7. So when x is equal to 7, and if I take this value and I substitute it into the quadratic equation here, when I work it out, it'll be equal to 0. So what would that look like? So wherever there's an x, I put in this 7. So again, 7 squared minus 5 times 7 minus 14 should be equal to 0. Okay, so if this is a root of this quadratic equation, it should satisfy the equation and be equal to 0. So if we use our calculator here just to calculate this, so 7 squared is 7 multiplied by 7, which is equal to 49. So that is 49. Okay, minus 5 times 7 is equal to minus 35. And then minus 14 should be equal to 0. Okay, so if I take 49 minus 35 and minus, so if I'm on minus 35 and I minus 14, that's going to leave me with minus 49 is equal to 0. And we can see that these two will cancel out, so plus 49 minus 49 is equal to 0. And we can see therefore that this here is indeed a root. Is indeed a root for this quadratic here. And the same then as well, if I was to do exactly the same with this number here, if I was to substitute it into this quadratic, it would also equal to 0 as well. So that's basically the way that you use factors to find the roots of quadratic equations. So the first thing you do is you take your quadratic and you write it in this form. So whatever x squared, whatever minus x, whatever minus 14 is equal to 0. You have to make it equal to 0. Then you factorize it. Okay, so you can use this factorization method. Then you take each of the factors and you make them equal to 0. And then you solve for x. Okay, and then you can find your two roots. Now you don't need to take this unless the question tells you to substitute the value into the expression to check that it's 0. You don't need to do that, but I'm just showing you just for the purpose of explaining what a root actually is. Okay, so that's solving equations using factors. So solving quadratic equations using factors.